The male brain is what we call a gray matter brain. And what we mean is that males tend to use, we use up to 7 times more gray matter activity. Gray matter is in splotches in the brain. It happens in localized areas in the brain. So when we do a task, like I write a book, I'm writing that book pretty much in these word centers right here. That's my gray matter area for words, as it is similarly for the guys. Gray matter area for words, okay? And then I'll have a spatial gray matter area for pulling on the string, right? So I'm pulling on the string, that's a spatial task actually, right? It's a task happening in space. It's out here in space. I'm pulling on a string out here in space. I'm pulling, activating a gray matter area here in the parietal, right over here. Okay, female brain uses up to 10 times more white matter. So our lingo is it's more of a white matter brain. And what that is white matter coats everything. So white matter is sending signals from one part of the brain to the other parts of the brain instantaneously. White matter brain, gray matter brain. So you think about males and you do your citizen science and you study for 30 days the males around you and you're gonna go, this kind of makes sense. It's like, well, they get into something and if they get into it, they're into that. That's what they're into. And they're really focused on that. And if you want to test it out, go into any preschool or any environment where you have little kids and tell both the boys and girls, say, okay, it's time for circle time, and see who moves over for circle time. Who moves over for circle time? Right? Most of the girls, now one of them's concentrating, but mostly the girls will move over more quickly for circle time, and there'll be these 3 or 4 boys who are still doing this thing over here. And you're going, it's circle time, and they're still doing this thing. Okay, what's happened is their gray matter for that thing got activated. The rest of the brain, over here. Gray matter. The females were doing that same thing, the same craft, but they had 5 to 10 parts of their brain activated. So the sensorials, they got an auditory cue, right? Teacher said, it's time for circle time. The auditory cue came in, zing through the brain, right? And very fast through white matter, because white matter moves it all very fast. And here's the gray matter over here. So, with boys, of course, we kind of get this in a deep way because we realize if we want boys to live really good lives, we got to get them focused on 3 or 4 things that are their purpose, their character, right? You get them on these 3 or 4 things, their talent set, their focus, their character, you're going to get them to 25 and they're going to be, really working it. But if we don't find those 3 or 4 gray matter things for them, they could wander, they could kill, they could die, they could be in prison, they could be lost. So that's a complexity for boys around the gray matter that's solvable there. For girls, this brain is really complex because this brain is this white matter brain. So it's always working on 5 or 10 different things at once. So that's a white matter brain. Now, there are some guys here who would say the same things. Again, 1 in 5 exception rate, etc. We're all each other. We all have each other's, we all have what each other have. Males have white matter, females have gray matter. At the same time, you can test that over 30 days and you're going to get that result. You're mainly going to hear women saying those sorts of things. And that's a manifestation of this white matter brain. And this is an example of the difference between nature and culture. If you take this from a culture point of view, and this was popular for a while, the theory was, some people still say this, women do this because they were trained by their culture to take on all these things. And I would go the opposite direction. I would say nature started this. This is a white matter brain, and then gradually nurture and culture get wrapped around nature. And so, yeah, sometimes women are told, you take on everything, I'm just going to do this one thing. And that's not fair to women, God knows. But it starts in nature, and I think it's really helpful for people working with girls and for girls and women to understand that this starts in nature. So therefore, the fix, if it needs to have a fix, is going to have to be in the brain. Because this is a white matter brain. So everyone in a different way said this word, and you said it, can't stop thinking about that one thing, right? Okay, so that's a feature of a white matter brain. It's called rumination. So if you're working with girls, right, you have seen this, rumination, or if you're parenting daughters, as I have. How many of you have daughters? Okay, so, and then of course how many of you are working with girls? I know it was just a few, but okay, Great. Okay. So you're seeing this, and then you will see it in your, if you're male, you see it in your spouse. If heterosexual couple, you're going to see it in your female spouse. This ruminating thing. And so ruminating is a loop. It involves a couple things. So ruminating means thinking about it and processing it constantly, and it's a loop. So something has happened, an experience has happened, like a facial cue, like, okay, I'm going to give an example. So like I made an error in his age, even though I in my defense, he did say he was 85, but I made an error, right? Okay, so then we had this interaction. And then I apologized, right? And we had this interaction. Okay, now I can tell you that if that had happened to my wife, Gail, I haven't mentioned Gail yet though. Gail and I have been together 32 years, so married 30 years. We know each other really well. She's a therapist, and she describes herself as a white matter, high oxytocin female. And I'll tell you more what that means. But the white matter part is she will have thought about this interaction and whether everyone was okay with this interaction. She will have thought about that, or will think about that, sorry, for like a couple days. She'll be processing this interaction, right? And it was an important interaction. It was. My brain, like it seemed to me everyone was happy, and so my brain is done with it, right? Unless someone brings it back up and says, you know, I think you have some repair to do there, and so I would go do that repair. But I wouldn't. But Gail's brain. So there are a lot of women. So the male brain is on a spectrum, and so's the female brain, right? There are 7.3 billion of us. So there are, over 3.5 billion ways to be a male brain, and there are over 3.5 billion ways to be a female brain. So not every female is alike. But if you're on that spectrum of female, you're going to have more white matter activity, which means you may have a tendency toward more rumination. And that's a real vulnerability. So the asset of rumination is that females are always on the edge of being empathic, right? Because they're reading facial cues and they're constantly ruminating about, I wonder what that person's feeling. And a lot of it's unconscious. So that's the asset. But the liability is the rumination itself. If it lasts for a long time, it starts to invade. And one of the reasons that females predominate the overt depression diagnoses. Overt depression is, I feel sad. That's overt depression. One of the reasons females dominate that is because of this white matter brain and this rumination. So they ruminate and they create then this negative loop. And a reason they do that is there's a part of the brain called the cingulate gyrus, cingulate cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, all pretty much the same. It's up to 4 times more active in the female brain than the male. Up to 4 times more active. This is the focus attention part of the brain. So we can hear 2 things there. It's one of the reasons you have so many more males who have severe ADD, because their focus or attention part of the brain is 4 times less active anyway. So if they have any issue, they have less fail-safe, so they're going to tend to have more attention problems. But the other side of that coin is, if you have 4 times more activity in that part of the brain, wow, it's hard to shut that brain off, because it's focusing and it's attending, and it has to learn, sort of has to learn, okay, how do I not focus and not attend? Because if I keep focusing on 5 or 10 things, I will become depressed. My brain will fry, and I will be sad about 10 or 20 things at once and not even realize that that's what's happening in my brain. So, and then of course, if you traumatize that brain, sexually abused, physically abused, traumatize that brain, and it's already got a very active cingulate gyrus, it's going to become even more active and vigilant, right, and watching. Etc. So everything has pluses and minuses, and the plus is less attention problems, but the minus is too much attention. Then there's a whole other layer that attaches to that, which is the hormoneology. So in this thing, I think we can see that the boy keeps on pulling, and the girl, right, her white matter brain figures it out quicker, doesn't it? I mean, isn't that really what happened from a science-based perspective? It wasn't that she gave up, per se. There was nothing negative about what she did. Her brain just said, it stopped. Whatever the heck's going on, they're messing with me. And I'm 6 months old, so I really can't talk much yet. So I'll just vocalize and go, bah, and then cry, and I think someone will come help me. And sure enough, because everyone is very nice, they all come and they give her a hug. And so the white matter brain figures it out. And another, by the way, a little piece is the middle of the brain, the corpus callosum in females, is more active than in males, and is generally that those tissues are larger, so there's more signaling back and forth anyway. So between the white matter brain and the corpus callosum, she's going to probably read the situation quicker. And when we made that joke earlier about like how many females, can you get 5 females somewhere to go into a dark basement and show their love by throwing darts? Okay, so the male part of it was the spatial, right? Guys love spatially, they love physically, they love through challenge, because they're not as verbal, so they love these other ways. But the female part of that is, she can see 20 scenarios, right? That make her say, that would be the stupidest thing I could do with my life, you know? How stupid can my brother be to go into a dark basement with all of the spiders, and we got the ants, and we got the little web, cobweb and all, and then think of all the sensorials there. She's feeling already through her sensorials what it's gonna feel like to have that spider web touch her neck, and she's like, what? And then the dart. Do I want the dart in my eye? It makes no sense to have the dart in my eye. That seems so stupid, right? So you know, and you look at males and females as teenagers, and girls do high risk things, of course they do, boys do high, but the high risk stuff that boys do and the high risk stuff that girls do, not exactly the same. Girls, you know, they tend to mature quicker, and part of that is that they just see it, and they just go, that just seems like stupid behavior, and I'm not going to do it. Okay, so the other thing that's happening, right, her white matter brain sees much more clearly, more quickly. One thing she misses, though, I don't want to forget to say this, one thing that, and this is big for us working with girls, there is one thing she misses, right, we both learn from each other. There's an asset to pulling on the string. And see what you think this asset is. If you just keep pulling on the string, and pulling on the string, and pulling on the string, what's the asset? What's good about that? Yeah, persistence. And so persistence and enchantment, right, that Katie was talking about. Okay, there is an asset there in the persistence. Persistence. So, you know, the way I like to put it is, I'm pulling on the string, I'm pulling on the string. This is a message that actually would be good for girls, that we want to give girls. Girls for whom they can see everything, so they won't leap in and do it and invent it and muck and be in the muck. They won't do it because they see everything. White matter brain, oh, I see 5, 6 possibilities. I got to get that possibility right before I don't think I'll show anyone yet. I think I need to do this first. And I want to hear more from so-and-so. So that takes a day. Got to hear everything from so-and-so. Then I need to hear, right? And then this goes on and on and on. And meanwhile, someone else over here leapt in and did it. And then here's the girl, who's now maybe a woman, going, but that was my idea, right? That doesn't feel very good. So there is an asset to spending your whole life pulling a string and failing is what it's really about. Not caring if things are perfect, not caring if it's really working, but just going at it and keep going at it and keep going at it and failing and failing and failing. And then the 510th time, you invent the iPhone, right? How can you invent the iPhone if you don't fail 500 times? So that's an asset we want to bring over to girls and say to girls, you know, we need you to fail more, forget perfection, especially birth to 20, because that's your growing time, that's your learning time. We want you to learn, we want you to fail, we want you to make a mess. These are all good things. So that's a really neat message to give girls.